Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson, and for Naperville Reads, the second half of our program, we have Daniel Pink and his book, A Whole New Mind. Well, Dan, welcome to Naperville.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, and thank you for being the second half of our Naperville Reads program. So
it's great, especially given who the first half was.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole point of this thing was, you know, that right brain stuff. And so you
Absolutely.
were the first one we thought of, the committee, when we were coming up. And Brian Selznick was sort of an obvious choice when it came to the children's half of Naperville Reads. So what do you think about being, you know, chosen for a citywide read program? Have you done this before?
No, I think it's great, and what's so fantastic about it is that, you know, Brian Selznick's book is, I mean, my kids read it, I read it, it's awesome, it's great, it's a story, and my book is not a story. My book is not a novel. My book is not even, there's narrative in it, but it's not a narrative. It's a book that has an argument. It's an argument about the economy, and typically, you know, a book that has an argument about the economy is not something that people in a city want to read. And so it's delightful to me that people want to read it, chew over the ideas, debate it, talk about it, and put some of these principles into action. Well,
it's principles we can use in a lot of different aspects.
Yeah.
In a community like this, I think it's something we all need to hear. With A Whole New Mind, what was the spark? What was the beginnings of this book? What made you want to write this book?
Well, it was a few things. First of all, in my first book, Free Agent Nation, I traveled around the United States and interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people who'd gone to work for themselves. And that was a fascinating and, in its own way, exhilarating experience. But it began to dawn on me that that was really about how people were working. But I began to detect some changes in what people were actually doing. And so I sort of put that in the back of my head. About 20 years ago, I spent a fair amount of time in India. And so I started following the outsourcing story fairly early in the game, writing about it before it was, you know, very salient and almost like not even interesting anymore. And then I noticed in some other writing that I did on business that some of the most interesting, innovative, talented people who I met in business, when I got to know them a little bit better, it turned out they had a background in the fine arts. They had a BFA in oil painting, and they were a management consultant, or they had a degree in theater, or one woman had an MFA in ceramics. And so I said, well, it's kind of interesting that this fine arts background, which is something I never really took seriously, is actually being deployed in business in some really interesting ways.
So, I mean, that whole thing is, it's really interesting because when we first heard you, we heard you at a bookseller's sort of education day out in Portland, Oregon. And it was like you were preaching to the choir for all of us as booksellers, you know. Sort of.
But in some ways, it's a sinner preaching to the choir.
That's true.
Because I mean, as you know, Becky, from our conversations, is that I, you know, remain a very, very, very left-brain guy. I love numbers. I'm very sequential. I make arguments. This is how I see the world. And having looked at a lot of the data, having crunched the numbers, having used my left brain to look at what's going on in people's workplaces, in their jobs, in their organizations, I don't think it's close that the scales are tilting and that these right brain abilities are the ones that matter most. And people like me have a lot of work to do.
In your view, what is globalization? And what is it about right brain thinkers that we can change how our economy is going to be going as individuals?
Well, globalization, in the sense that I'm talking about, it basically means the moving of certain kinds of white-collar work overseas. We've already seen this before. Routine blue-collar work that's basically about following rules with your body. That kind of work has left this country. It's not coming back. And now the same thing is happening with routine white-collar work that's basically rule-based, that you can write down a series of steps and it has a right answer. And that's certain kinds of accounting, certain kinds of engineering, not all, certain kinds of computer programming. And so what's happening in this respect with globalization is that this left brain kind of work has become a commodity, racing to the cheapest cost provider, forcing us to compete more and more with the right brain capabilities of artistry and empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking.
Right. So as a nation that's already developed those things and even some creativity, what happens when those developing countries sort of equal us? I mean, what's
absolutely right. And that's a very good question. And there's no, you know, the United States does not have a monopoly on creativity, innovation, or anything like that. However, and if you go to India, and what you find is if you go into an Indian software company, for instance, you cannot go for more than 90 seconds in that building without someone using the phrase "up the value chain," meaning that They don't want to be doing routine work for the next 50 years because it's boring and because other people will do it for even less. So the question becomes, in some ways, it's actually Tom Friedman's question, which is whether you race to the bottom or race to the top. And I think that the story of economies traditionally has been a race to the top. But this country needs to start racing. And it needs to be running the right race. It needs to be not sort of turning our schools, turning our students into these vending machines for right answers, but equipping students with the ability to think horizontally, to be curious, to have an aesthetic sensibility. Those are the kinds of things. And I actually think that for a lot of kind of institutional, cultural reasons, the United States is very well placed to do these things.
Oh, I think so too. In the book, you talk about the 6 traits, or those abilities that we all need to develop or master or whatever they are. Can you just mention them really quickly, 6, and give a quick description? I know it's hard.
Design, which is basically infusing any kind of offering with an aesthetic sensibility along with functional set abilities. Story, narrative. Symphony, which is big picture thinking, connecting the dots. Empathy, standing in someone's shoes, feeling with their heart, seeing with their eyes. Very important in business because it's hard to outsource and hard to automate. Play, joyfulness, games, and finally meaning. I think that we are in a world that has democratized the search, or a country that has democratized the search for meaning, and that pursuit of meaning has become important in culture and also in business.
Right. So it's been two and a half years since you wrote the book, or how long? I'm not sure when it came out exactly.
Yeah, it came out. It's been 2.5 years.
Yeah. So those traits that you talk about, those things that we need to master, how has it changed your life? I mean, personally, and has those ideas changed, or have you seen anybody like taking these and like going for it?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you see a lot of. I mean, it's very gratifying. You've seen a lot of companies, get the book, which is great as a author and a bookseller, bulk buys.
Yeah, we like that.
Right?
Yeah, we really like
that.
So
you and pass them out to employees and do a lot of the exercises in the book, because there are a lot of exercises on how to get better at this. It's gotten a fairly good take up among schools because I think that teachers and principals understand that the goal is to prepare students for their future, not our past. And that's very hard to do within a system as screwed up as the typical education system. Right. And so teachers and principals are taking this and trying to smuggle some of these ideas inside. And as for me personally, I have developed very, late in life, a much more acute visual sensibility, much more acute design sensibility. Having interviewed a lot of designers, having really steeped myself in design, having taken a drawing course, having a much better sense of, again, I'm starting from a base of 0, okay, so it's a big improvement for me.
That.
No, for on a lot of this aesthetic stuff.
Sure.
So it's a big leap for me. It's actually changed the way that I literally see the world. I have a much more, I think, acute visual sensibility, much more highly developed aesthetic sensibility. I'm never going to be a great artist. I'm never going to be a great designer. I'm never going to be a great illustrator. But I have a newfound, very heartfelt and deep appreciation for that approach to things, because I think that design thinking in particular is a very potent way to solve problems.
Right. So that left brain side of you, this new right brain stuff that you develop is really helping, sort of the mix of the two.
It's helping me become more, cognitively ambidextrous rather than just simply try to logic my way through everything.
Right.